CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The inquiry begins. Just how did a systems failure ground flights out of the United States for hours?
Our other headlines, don't call us. That's the message from UK emergency ambulance workers on strike in a dispute over pay.
Police in Germany used force to clear climate protesters out of a village in a showdown over the expansion of coal mining.
And Russia's Wagner Group claims victory in the eastern town of Soledar, but Ukraine says its troops are hanging on.
Flights across the United States are now starting to resume after all planes were grounded due to a technical glitch.
Thousands of passengers were stranded as the Federal Aviation Administration worked to try to restore a computer system which alerts pilots to potential flight route hazards. Some international flights were also affected by the outage. Our correspondent John Terrett is watching events for us in New York. John, the authorities have now lifted the ground stop.
Yes, they have, Robin and Jamie, but I'm afraid the damage has been done and it's likely to persist for at least the next 12 to 24 hours, I would think. And I have to say as well, thinking about it, I don't think that any flights were ever in danger, those already in the air and those that might have taken off if they'd allowed them to take off, because this is just a part of the air traffic control system in America. But nonetheless, they called this what they call nationwide ground stop, and that meant between the hours of 4 in the morning and 9 in the morning Eastern Time, which equates to 09 GMT to 14 GMT for people watching around the world. All domestic flights at every kind of airport across the whole of the country were not allowed to take off. So I have a friend who runs an air taxi service at an airport in New Jersey, and he confirmed that his crews weren't allowed to take off this morning, as well as the big airlines in all the big airports around the whole country. So it's quite an extraordinary thing that has happened. And of course, now we have knock-on delays. Now, the part of the air traffic control system that was affected was the bit that pilots know as the NOTAMs. Now, NOTAMs stands for Notice to Airmen. But these days, because we have thousands of women pilots in America, they had to change the name, so they call it Notice to Air Missions. And basically what happens is when a pilot goes into the briefing room ahead of any flight, which they all have to do, on the wall will be NOTAMs, and they will tell the pilots about changes to airports, runways, taxiways, late weather forecasts, all that sort of stuff. But because new technology allows this, pilots can now get updates to the NOTAMs when they're actually in the air. And that is the bit of the air traffic control system that failed today. Now, we don't know why it failed yet. We'll find out one day. But for the time being, it's just caused chaos in all the airports around the country. And I don't know whether you know, but aircraft coming across the Atlantic actually lose contact with air traffic control vocally after they've left Shannon in Southern Ireland, which is the last port of contact, before they get to Gander in Canada, which is the emergency airport for flights coming into America over the Atlantic. They lose vocal contact, but they can still get these texts, you see. So that's why it's such an important thing. President Biden has been briefed by the Transport Secretary here. He's called Pete Buttigieg, so Biden is aware of what's going on. And the White House has been keen to point out that there is no evidence of any terrorist activity here, nor any cyber attacks. This appears to be something that required a reboot of the system nationwide. Now, international flights were also affected. If the planes were in the air when this happened, they were allowed to land, though I suspect they weren't allowed to go to the gate. They had to sit in the middle of the field. And I know that there are still aircraft around the world at capital cities waiting to come here, which are being delayed, and that's likely to continue for some time. Basic problem: massive underfunding of the air traffic control system in the United States. And the problem is, if you're a politician, the last thing that you want to worry about ever it doesn't get you any votes, is funding the air traffic control system. As long as it's working, and it works 99.9% recurring of the time, the politicians look the other way until something goes massively wrong, like today. So what's going to happen is there is already a congressional committee that's going to haul the senior members of the Federal Aviation Authority up to Capitol Hill, and they will be asked to explain themselves, to explain what happened today, why it happened, and what can be done in the future. In the meantime, 3 million people were due to fly on this Wednesday around the country, and this has probably gone up from now, but I have at the moment 4,000 delays and 800 cancellations. That's an awful lot, and I think people are at least thanking their lucky stars that it's a Wednesday and not a Friday before a long weekend. Guys?
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
More than 20,000 ambulance workers are striking in England and Wales in the latest dispute with the government over pay.
The National Health Service has told the public to only call the emergency number for life-threatening situations. Workers also walked out in December, but this time this strike is expected to have more impact as it includes call handlers. They want above-inflation pay rises, but the government says this is unaffordable.
Let's talk to our correspondent, Paul Barber, who's outside St Thomas's Hospital in London. So, Paul, this is yet another day of strikes here in the UK.
It certainly is, Robin, and you might be able to hear some ambulance sirens just behind me. I'm outside St Thomas's Hospital in central London, and over the past few hours, we've actually only seen 2 ambulances, emergency ambulances, arrive at the emergency department, which you can see just behind me. I've been into the department and there are lots of people in there, but lots of people have been arriving by taxi or even on foot, some of them not looking too well, but they've been heeding the government's warnings not to call 999 and get an ambulance to bring them into hospital. Up to 25,000 ambulance workers on strike, the second time this winter that they've gone on strike. This time, as you said, they've been joined by call handlers from the 999 emergency phone number, and this is affecting most of England and Wales as well. The Health Secretary Steve Barclay saying that people should be very wise about calling 999, only do so in life and limb situations. Ambulances, like you can hear behind me, are attending the most serious so-called Category 1 medical emergencies. These include cardiac arrests, but for anything else, even things like strokes or severe burns, ambulance organisations are saying that people should not call ambulances. They should try and make their own way into hospital. This is about pay. The 4.75% pay offer is just not enough, ambulance unions say, to mitigate the cost of living crisis. It's also about recruitment. They cannot recruit enough people for jobs in the service because it pays frankly below national average wages, but it's also about patient safety. There's a broader crisis within the NHS, which means that when ambulances arrive at hospitals like St Thomas's, they often can't even get in and drop off the patients because there just aren't enough beds. So it's an unusual day here at St Thomas's. Usually there would be an absolute flow of ambulances, sirens all day. It's been very quiet. We've seen some ambulances leave to attend those really serious cases. Some of those ambulances being driven by military personnel. They've been drafted in to help during these strikes.
So today's strikes are one of a series seen in recent weeks here in the UK, and partly in response to that, the government's planned some anti-strike legislation, and the Prime Minister was asked about that in his first questions of the year in Parliament today.
That's right, Robin, he was. Rishi Sunak was quizzed by the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, saying that during the COVID pandemic he clapped for nurses, but now he wants to sack them. This is in reference to some of the provisions in this so-called minimum safety legislation that the government tabled yesterday. It won't affect these strikes. It would come into effect later in the year if it is approved. But this would mean that a certain number of people would have to still go to work during strikes in key sectors, including ambulance workers, doctors, nurses, train drivers, fire emergency workers as well. And if some people did choose to strike, they could potentially lose their jobs. Rishi Sunak in Parliament said that this was about balancing the right to strike with maintaining core patient safety, that he was on the side of patient safety, but the Labour Party was in hock to the Labour unions. Here's a little more of what the Prime Minister had to say in Prime Minister's Questions.
What's terrifying terrifying is that right now, people not knowing whether when they call 999, they will get the treatment that they need. Now, Mr. Speaker, in Australia and Canada and the US, they ban strikes on blue light services. We're not doing that. All we're saying is that in these emergency services, patients should be able to rely on a basic level of life-saving care. Why is he against that, Mr. Speaker?
Well, the Prime Minister also pointed out that other countries, including Spain and France, have similar minimum provisions in their strike laws, and that he didn't understand why Labour would be opposed to that. Labour said that if they get back into power, they would repeal the legislation. The union's also saying that it's unworkable, undemocratic and possibly illegal. Something else that came up in Prime Minister's questions today, the Prime Minister revealed that he is in fact registered with a GP, a family doctor in the NHS, the National Health Service. He'd been under pressure to reveal whether he was or not. He did say that he had had private healthcare in the past, but that he was still registered with a GP. As far as the strike today is concerned, we're hearing from NHS providers, which represents NHS organisations in the country, that it's still too early to judge the impact that the strike has had today on patient care, but there was undoubtedly going to be a knock-on effect. Robin.
Paul, thanks very much. Our correspondent Paul Barber in central London. Let's talk now to Roger Seifert, who's a Professor of Industrial Relations at the University of Wolverhampton. Good to have you with us on the programme. So what is the UK government hoping to achieve with this planned legislation?
Well, on the surface, they're simply saying that in certain services, that whether there's a strike or not, whether the strike's lawful or not, there has to be a minimum service agreement. This is something that the Conservatives discussed when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, and they've been very key, particularly in the transport sector, to curtail the right to strike.
And Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has called this idea a simple proposition, but the unions have called it undemocratic, unworkable and illegal. They're both very different positions, aren't they? Where might a compromise be found?
Well, there won't be a compromise on the legislation. There's no compromise to be had there. What basically the unions are saying, which is based on evidence from other countries, is that when you get to the detail of actually putting into practice these regulations, is they're virtually unworkable. You can't do it in any sensible way. So if you take the railways, if it's a 20% minimum service level, then even if everyone goes to work, you've still got only one train in 5 operating, so it doesn't really have much of an impact. And if you say to a striking worker, you have to go to work, and they say no, it's then up to the employer to dismiss. I can't see many employers wanting to go down that route, because if they do dismiss individuals, they will probably get a walkout of the rest of the workforce. So industrial relations would get much worse in those sectors.
So you mentioned other countries. Countries like France and Spain have similar legislation to this Plan 1 in place. You said it was unworkable. Does it work there, and how does it work, if so?
It doesn't work in France at all. It's just there, as to some extent it is here, political posturing by governments trying to look tough in the face of trade union activity. In terms of Spain and some other countries like Estonia and Hungary, it's very bitty, and it's normally associated with other issues such as outright bans. But without an outright ban on the strike, then even with these measures, in most cases the strike will still be effective. And in the health service, it's a bit disingenuous of the government, because the unions already agree a minimum service level, whether it's nurses, junior doctors or ambulance staff going on strike.
Well, let's go back to the idea of a compromise then. This legislation, you think, will not be it. How can an end be found to this series of strikes?
Well, that's a different issue. This particular legislation will probably get stuck in the House of Lords anyway, so it's unlikely that it will be effective even this year, let alone towards the summer of next year. And Labour have said they repeal it, so no one's going to use it if it's going to be repealed. In terms of the current wave of strikes, most of these are in the public sector now, and there's only one way forward, and everybody knows that, and the government's got to come up with a bit more money. Not a lot more money, but a bit more money than they put on the table. Otherwise, these strikes will drag on. In the private sector, such as Royal Mail, you've got a different set of calculations where there's the companies having losses, the workers are losing pay, and you normally expect some sort of resolution, as we had with BT earlier in the year, late last year. So it's difficult to see any stoppage in the public sector unless the government actually finds money one way or another.
OK, Professor Roger Seifert from the University of Wolverhampton, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Cheers.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the cost of living will continue to dominate global risks for the next 2 years. That's the assessment from the World Economic Forum.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Police in Germany are using force to clear climate protesters out of an abandoned village in a showdown over the expansion of an open-cast coal mine.
Police fired warning shots at demonstrators in Lützerath before moving in. The mine is run by energy firm RWE, which said it would start to demolish the former settlement on Wednesday. Lützerath has become a symbol for environmentalist groups demanding an end to the use of coal.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin, who I'm hoping we can talk to in the next few moments, if we can get the line up to him. I'm not sure we can talk to him. We might return to Trent Murray in Berlin a little later in the programme. In the meantime, we'll carry on with the rest of today's news.
Investment bank Goldman Sachs has begun a round of staff redundancies. More than 3,200 staff will be affected, around 6.5% of its global workforce. The company is also reviewing its bonus policy and the use of private jets. Profits at the bank fell 44% in the first 9 months of the year, and management say they're looking at expenses in every corner of the firm.
Uniqlo's parent company is raising staff wages in Japan by up to 40% as the country faces its highest inflation in 4 decades. Fast Retailing says the hikes will help to keep its brand globally competitive. It's the first time in at least 20 years that the company, which operates more than 3,000 clothing stores worldwide, is revising salaries across its entire group.
The CEO of LVMH has promoted his daughter to run fashion brand Dior as part of a reshuffle at the world's largest luxury group. The current head of Dior will move over to flagship brand Louis Vuitton as chief executive. The changes are thought to be part of Bernard Arnault's move towards leadership succession at the group that he built into the most valuable company in Europe.
The new book by Prince Harry has become the fastest-selling non-fiction title in UK history. The controversial memoir, Spare, sold more than 400,000 copies on its first day on sale. In the book, the Prince takes aim at fellow members of the royal family and includes details of a major rift with his brother, William.
The soaring cost of living is the greatest short-term risk facing the world, but climate change poses the greatest threat in the long term.
That's the conclusion of the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report for 2023. The report says world leaders need to tackle climate change as a matter of urgency if they want to protect themselves from future shocks.
Solving climate change is kind of like the ultimate team sport. It isn't just coming from one sector, so it has to be governments, it has to be business, it has to be the finance sector working together to really address these really complex and systemic issues.
Let me just take you back to that story in Germany where the police are using force to clear out climate protesters out of an abandoned village. This is a showdown over the expansion of open-cast coal mining. I'm hoping we can talk now to our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. Trent, this demolition was supposed to go ahead on today, I think, in the last few hours. What's the latest you have?
Yeah, Jamie, that's right. And this is a showdown which has really been brewing over the past few weeks. On one side, you've got those protesters which have effectively set up camp in that abandoned village of Lützerath over the past 2 years, really. And then on the other side, you've got this growing police presence getting ready to go in and evict them. And today we saw the police officially start to move in to begin that work. They believe it will take a couple of weeks, just given the number of people that are living there in abandoned buildings. Some of them are living in tree houses or set up tents in the town. The protesters that are there really didn't take too kindly to the police trying to move in. In fact, they threw rocks and stones in many cases at the police officers. Even some pyrotechnics were used, and the police have really condemned that. But passions effectively are running very high over all of this. This village was effectively closed up last year. The last of the residents moved out after settling financially with the company and going through the courts. And this coal mine now is effectively about to swallow up the township. But those protesters, which really have come from all over Germany and Europe in many cases, just are not giving up and say that this is a real battle, not just for this particular village, but for climate change in general. And so they maintain that they are not leaving. The police are, as I say, saying that they are going to continue with this eviction process. RWE, the company which now owns the land that this old village sits on, says they are calling on what they call the squatters to leave immediately so they can start to move that heavy machinery in and demolish the town.
Trent, the activists will justify their behaviour, saying that they fear that Germany may not be able to reach its emissions targets. So where are we, as far as Germany is concerned, in terms of fulfilling its climate commitment obligations?
Well, I think that argument probably will be welcomed and supported by, well, certainly a number of green groups here, because when you look at the data, Germany just is not hitting its climate change targets right now. So we've just had some independent analysis released for the previous year, 2022. What it showed was that for the second year in a row, Germany's target of reducing carbon emissions by 40% compared to the year 1990 were not met again. They only got it to 39%, 1% shy. So in other words, they're seemingly going backwards. And the reason I say that is because last year, given that sort of energy showdown with Russia, there was a real push amongst German industry and also households to reduce energy. So despite energy being a lot less energy being used last year, carbon emissions didn't really reduce at all. And that is because with those gas supplies from Russia seemingly drying up, the government had to turn back to coal and fire up old mothballed coal power stations in order to keep the lights on. So we know that moving forward, the government does say it is committed to those climate change goals, but right now it just is not on track. And for that reason, many of those green activists there just say it's simply madness to open a new coal mine. For what it's worth, the company behind this says there is a business case to open this new mine, and they will push ahead with it. And Jamie, we have just learned in the past few hours that those green activists will get a big, I suppose, boost and solidarity arrival on Saturday. That is because Greta Thunberg, we understand, will be visiting them to join that picket line and to try and rally against this coal mine opening, the largest in Europe, I should note.
Trent, thank you for that. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin.
Mercenaries from Russia's top paramilitary groups say they've taken control of the eastern Ukrainian town of Soledar.
The head of the Wagner Group says a cauldron had formed in the centre of the key town in the Donbass region, but officials in Kyiv have challenged that claim, saying Soledar is and will be Ukrainian. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed reports now from Kherson.
The head of the Wagner Group, and that's the mercenary group that's fighting in Soledar, fighting in Bakhmut on behalf of Russia, that is Evgeny Prigozhin. On Tuesday, he posted to his Telegram channel, he put up a post saying that Russia was victorious. They controlled Soledar in the east of the country. And there were pictures that he posted of himself surrounded by his fighters. But it wasn't clear whether those pictures were taken. A Russian news agency later posted the same picture, saying that it was in the salt mines of Soledar. That wasn't verified. Kyiv is denying that Russia has taken control of Soledar. Things are very blurry inside of Bakhmut, of Soledar. And the intel sources that I'm getting information from are saying that there has been a full-scale Russian assault on that area, assaults plural, and that Russia was attempting to cut off Ukraine's supply line to Soledar. It's a key city. It's a key salt mining city. It would be booty in the slang for the head of Wagner Group to take. Those intel sources are saying that, according to what they've got, also blurry, not clear who controls, but there are reports that half the city is controlled at this point by Russia.
Moscow says its troops around Soledar have what it calls positive momentum. But the Kremlin is telling Russians to wait for official statements about the situation in eastern Ukraine. Our correspondent Stuart Smith reports from Moscow.
Yeah, well, the Ministry of Defence is not saying that it has control of Soledar. It's saying that it's blocked the north and the south, but that its forces are continuing to fight elements of the Ukrainian armed forces in Soledar. That's different to what the head of the private military organisation Wagner, who on Tuesday suggested that his troops and his troops alone, without the Ministry of Defence, had managed to secure the whole city. Now, that's being reported differently on various strands of Russian state media, some sticking with the Ministry of Defence point of view, others saying that Russian forces in general have control of the city and reporting that as a victory. Other sources also commenting, the leaders of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, the Russian installed officials, also suggesting that there are Russian army paratroopers present around, but also suggesting that for now the city isn't taken. So as much confusion in Russia about the reality as there seems to be in Ukraine as well.
And Stuart, Russian and Ukrainian human rights commissioners have been meeting in the Turkish capital. What have they been saying?
Yeah, it's a rare opportunity for Ukrainian and Russian officials to talk face-to-face, this time in the context of a meeting amongst international ombudsmen in Turkey. They were discussing, first of all, the potential for prisoner swaps, which have been successfully arranged before, most recently on Sunday. On Wednesday, today, they managed to achieve another 40 for 40 prisoner exchange, but there had been hopes that more would be discussed in this rare moment of face-to-face conversation. What they said they talked about was servicemen missing on both sides, those unaccounted for, and how to find them and get them back to where they need to be. Also on civilian humanitarian issues. But the Russian human rights ombudsman, different to the Ukrainian one, suggested they were looking for a ceasefire of some kind and whether Turkey may support that, and also suggesting to the Speaker of Turkey's parliament that it is not happy, Russia's not happy with Turkey sending weapons to Ukraine and is urging Turkey not to do that. In terms of what Ankara can offer, with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan talking on Wednesday as well, he suggested he's willing to help take people from Ukraine that need medical support to hospitals in Turkey for treatment and then sending them back again. But no discussion addressing those particular points of Russia's ombudsman.
NATO and the European Union are launching a new task force to improve the protection of critical infrastructure in response to last year's attack on the Nord Stream gas pipelines. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the sabotage of the Russia to Germany gas link last September showed the need to take action. Western and Russian officials have traded accusations on who was responsible for the Nord Stream blasts.
We have seen the sabotage of Nord Stream that has shown that we need to be ready and that we need to confront this new type of threat. So today we are launching an EU-NATO task force for resilient critical infrastructure. This is a task force where our experts from NATO and the European Union will work hand in hand to identify key threats to our critical infrastructure, to look at the strategic vulnerabilities that we do have.
6 people have been injured in a knife attack at Paris's Gare du Nord train station. France's Interior Minister says a man attacked the victims during the morning rush hour with a homemade weapon. He was shot by off-duty police and hospitalised with serious injuries. Authorities are trying to establish a motive for the stabbings.
Peru's Attorney General is launching an inquiry into the country's new president and members of her cabinet following violent protests that have left at least 40 people dead. The officials are being investigated on charges of genocide, homicide and serious injuries. Violence erupted in December after former President Pedro Castillo was arrested. The new government won a vote of confidence in Congress by a wide margin on Tuesday.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. An international airline trade body says COVID measures for travellers from China are unnecessary. We'll hear from them next.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The inquiry begins. Just how did a systems failure ground flights out of the United States for hours?
Russia's Wagner Group claims victory in the eastern town of Soledar, but Ukraine says its troops are hanging on.
And don't call us. That's the message from UK emergency ambulance workers on strike in a dispute over pay.
French unions are calling for prolonged strike action after the government announced its controversial pension reform plan that would see the national retirement age raised if it's approved by Parliament.
Protests are expected across the country in the coming months as the plan is debated, with the first day of major strike action set for the 19th of January. Our correspondent Siobhan McCall reports.
It's predicted to be one of the toughest challenges yet for Emmanuel Macron's government.
À compter du 1er septembre,
from the 1st of September, the legal retirement age will be gradually raised by 3 months per year to reach 64 years in 2030. So we'll be at 63 years and 3 months at the end of the presidential term.
The prospect of French pension reform announced by Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne is dominating headlines, with citizens, unions and the opposition seething.
An opinion poll showed only yesterday that 85% of French people are opposed to any extension of the retirement age. And we understand them because it's unbearable to work longer.
All major unions are banding together in the wake of the announcement. The government is calling for dialogue, stressing that the project will not be implemented overnight. It says it's a necessary move to balance pension costs, which amount to around 14% of France's total output. But those assurances aren't quelling concern among French workers.
Absolument pas.
I am not at all satisfied with this reform. It does not take into account the difficulty of each person's work, and there is no social justice. I am very lucky. I have a job that is not physically demanding, but I think that this is not the right way to go. We are always asked for more without much in return, so I support all those who are going on strike.
Je suis ni satisfait ni insatisfait en fait, puisque
I'm neither satisfied nor dissatisfied because, according to what economists say, the pension system today will fail over the next 25 or 30 years, but it will regulate itself afterwards. So today we're going to make the working people pay for the burden of the future pensions without the system really being in danger. So I think it's not the best thing to do, at least not in this way.
The pension reform plan is set to be presented for debate in Parliament later this month, but it's likely to be an uphill battle given that Macron's government no longer has a working majority. If it does pass, ministers want it to be implemented by the end of the year. Siobhan McCall, CGTN.
The world's main airline trade body has criticised the reintroduction of COVID measures for travellers from China.
The International Air Transport Association says the measures have proven ineffective in the past and that reimposing them is a knee-jerk reaction. Conrad Clifford is the association's Deputy Director General.
If you talk to epidemiologists, medical experts, if you look at the recommendations from the World Health Organization, none of these groups are recommending the reinstatement of testing as a means to control or prevent the transmission of coronavirus. So these are measures that are ineffective and we don't support them. They put people off flying, they frighten people. These are not good things and they're not necessary.
Now, of course, you represent the world's airlines. Your critics might suggest that you're putting business interests ahead of public health, are you?
No, we would never put business interests ahead of public health. Safety is always the #1 priority for any airline. And that's not just health safety, that's operational safety as well. And we have many safety protocols in place that we, of course, follow very diligently. It's just in this case, these measures are being put in place. They're not effective, they're not required, and it would be far better if they were removed.
The airline and the travel industry more widely is still recovering after the coronavirus pandemic. Are the new measures likely to deter Chinese passengers from coming to Europe?
I don't think they'll necessarily deter people, but they'll make it more difficult. And we were very pleased to see that China had decided to reopen its borders. This is very good news for everybody. And we simply don't see the need for these sorts of additional measures to be put in place at this time. Coronavirus is endemic in Europe and in many other parts of the world. So if you already have the virus transmission going on, it really isn't necessary to institute pre-departure testing in the way that's being done with Chinese passengers.
Well, let's look ahead across 12 months. How is this year looking for the travel industry? Is the return of Chinese passengers likely to make a significant impact?
It does, and it makes a very significant impact in the Asia-Pacific region, where Chinese tourists are a significant and important part of the economic activity. So yes, it does make a difference. But generally speaking, it differs region by region around the world. North America is closely coming back to pre-COVID levels. The rest of the world is following. And the sooner we can get everybody travelling again, the better.
The health ministry in Uganda has officially declared the country free of the Ebola virus.
It ends an outbreak that began almost 4 months ago and killed 55 people. There have been no new cases now for 42 days, twice the disease's incubation period, reaching the official threshold for declaring the outbreak over.
China's new foreign minister has visited the African Centre for Disease Control in Ethiopia. It's the first stop on a 5-nation tour for Qingang. Well, our correspondent Gurum Chala is in Addis Ababa. So how important is this new CDC headquarters?
So the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has done a remarkable job over the last many years, including the fight against the Ebola virus and then the COVID-19 pandemic as well. But it was not that much organized, and the service delivery itself was challenged because of lack of infrastructure. Now that seems to be elevated because of the construction of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention here in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, with the full funding of the Chinese government. And today the Foreign Minister Qingang has inaugurated it alongside the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed. So this is really significant. It's important. It's got labs and other facilities in it, also research center. It's going to transform perhaps the health sector of the African continent as well.
Gurum Chala in Addis Ababa, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, top security officials in Brazil's capital arrested following Sunday's storming of Congress. We'll be reporting from Rio next.
I fell in love with Chinese culture the second I started to experience it.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
Building bridges is a natural thing. There is no age and gender difference in our spirit, no race difference in our soul.
I think food is an incredible way of bringing different cultures together. I am enjoying learning every aspect about it.
Chinese literature stretches back for millennia, but it's still really relevant for today.
I hope that Chinese and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
An incredible mix of people, cultures, food, and there is so much to see and so much to do.
I have a great desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible.
It's about our future generation's future.
The craftsmanship, the technique, the material uses, the color uses.
You can kind of take things on board and continue to develop and grow.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Everything seems to have a story. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. A huge tick.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Brazil's government is increasing security in cities after threats of a repeat of Sunday's attack on the seat of government.
Even as the clean-up and investigation is taking place in the capital, Brasilia, more threats have been posted online by supporters of the former president, Jair Bolsonaro. They're refusing to accept his October election defeat to Lula da Silva. More than 1,500 people have now been arrested, including the former justice minister. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Paulo Cabral, in Rio. Paulo, just how worried is the government there?
Well, very worried. We have meetings going on round the clock in Brazilian measures being taken to try and prevent this protest from happening, or even the impacts of this protest if they happen. So there have been protests called by these anti-government far-right groups all over Brazil, and there is special concern with the protests called to happen in the capital, Brasilia. And actually, measures have been taken to shut the traffic of the Ministries Mall. It's the large square in front of the parliament, surrounded by all the ministries. So traffic has been blocked in this area, and people are being screened as they walk into the Ministries Mall to check if they don't have weapons or any other materials that could be used as weapons. For example, public authorities said that people will be allowed to walk into the Ministries Mall to protest with banners and flags, and there will be no limitation to what's written on these banners or flags, but they will not be allowed to be carried with poles or sticks that could be used in case of violence, in case of protest. So this is the matter now in the capital, Brasilia, but also in other parts of the country. There have been reports, there are reports that have been sent to the government calling about the risk of this protest that actually are not really necessarily secret reports. We know that these groups are very much articulated on social media, and so this is being publicly called for protests in cities around Brazil against the government, and now also in support of the people who have been arrested after the action in Brasilia. And this concern was heightened also by the collapse of 2 electricity transmission towers in Brazil on Sunday night into the early mornings of Monday, and into the early hours of Monday. And these towers collapsed in very different parts of Brazil, one in Rondônia in the far north in the Amazon, the other in Paraná near the extreme south of the country. And there is a probe now to find out, as there are indications that it could be the case that this happened after the action of these far-right groups that have been protesting against the government of Lula da Silva and against the elections that they consider illegitimate.
The former President Jair Bolsonaro is reported to be returning early from Florida. Is that going to calm or inflame the situation?
Well, look, we're still expecting a confirmation that this will happen. There's not a specific statement of Jair Bolsonaro saying that he will return. And actually, he's kept mostly silent since the electoral defeat and left to the United States just on the eve of the inauguration of Lula da Silva. So, yes, it is possible that he will return. Now, what the impacts of that will be, it's still to be seen. There are people in Brazil in the new government, particularly in the left wing, that want to see Bolsonaro arrested. They want to see him in jail for the crimes that they alleged he's committed during his government and also now connected to these riots. For example, so if there is an arrest order for Bolsonaro that could be issued even by a judge from a lower court, yes, this could inflame things around here. Will he calm down the situation? Also a mystery, because we don't know if Bolsonaro returns. Nobody knows exactly how he will behave. And there is another issue here at stake as well. It's not clear how much influence Bolsonaro still has on this hardcore far-right militants, on this hardcore supporters of Bolsonaro, because his silence between the election and all the way to the inauguration, and also the fact that he left Brazil as the government of Lula da Silva was about to begin, did disappoint as well many of his supporters that say that now they want military intervention, that they want Lula da Silva out of the government, that they want military intervention. But we don't see people anymore speaking about Bolsonaro that much in this protest. So at this point, it's not even clear how much power Bolsonaro would have over his following, or over what was his following, be it in terms of calming down the situation or inflammating it.
Paulo, thank you very much for that. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral in Rio.
The world's largest electric car maker, BYD, is now operating in Greece. It's selling a number of models with the hope of electrifying the market after a year of delays due to the pandemic. Our correspondent Evangelos Ipsas reports.
This is one of the Chinese minivans trying to win Greeks over in 2023. It can carry close to 780 kilos, It charges in about 30 minutes, and it can travel up to 275 kilometers with a single charge. It's fully electric, and the most important part, it has a price tag of $35,000, the cheapest in its category.
It's a really good time to switch and include an electric vehicle in your everyday life, especially now the government offers a grant. Now, on the other hand, the infrastructure is growing rapidly, and of course, using of these vans, you will notice difference in your pocket. As we say, the cost of use.
After making inroads into Hungary, Norway, and the Netherlands, BYD, the world's leader in electric vehicles, is now plugging into the Greek market. Late last year, the Chinese manufacturer opened its first dealership just outside of Athens, offering a range of vehicles from mini cargo vans to fully electric trucks and buses. It comes just a year after the Greek government pledged to ban the sale of new gasoline and diesel vehicles by 2030, adopting the EU's target for phasing out cars with internal combustion engines. They are even offering drivers up to 8,000 in grants to make the switch. In 2022, over 8,000 electrical vehicles were sold in Greece. Now, you might think that that number is small, but it's 10 times higher than before the pandemic. So vehicles like this, the ETP3 or the ETM6 with its rotating screens and its state-of-the-art cameras are well placed to win over the Greek market. And according to BYD's business development manager, the Greek appetite for electrical vehicles is growing fast.
The 2022 was a good year. Although we opened in October, all of our available fleet was already sold from November. To be honest, I also see 2023 following the same path. We have developed a good relationship with all the leasing companies in the country, and most of them have already pre-purchased most of our fleet for the month of January. But besides that, I have many individuals ordering as well.
So after years of stalled sales, the company's push into the electrical vehicle market seemed to be moving in the fast lane. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
The normally dry and sunny state of California is facing what weather forecasters say is a relentless parade of cyclones.
At least 14 people have died since the severe storms hit last week, causing mudslides and power outages. Police also continue to search for a 5-year-old boy who was swept away by floodwaters. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
President Joe Biden has declared an emergency for the state of California, which has been ravaged by a series of atmospheric river storms for more than 10 days. Torrential rain has spanned the state from north to south, with more than 90% of Californians, at least 34 million people, under a flood watch.
We need to get everyone out of the area to higher ground, to a place of safety, as well as let's get to these shelters so that way we can get warm and dry.
Tens of thousands of Californians have been put under evacuation orders, especially in coastal areas. That includes the town of Montecito on California's central coast, where TV host Ellen DeGeneres lives.
This creek next to our house never flows, ever. It's probably about 9 feet up, and it's going to go another 2 feet up. We have horses ready to evacuate. We need to be nicer to Mother Nature, because Mother Nature is not happy with us.
The dangers from the severe weather were underscored by this scene, a tree sliding down a hillside and falling onto a highway in the Santa Cruz Mountains. In the coastal city of Morro Bay, cell phone footage on social media showed vehicles submerged in the floodwaters. In the central mountain town of Felton, residents have been forced to dig their way out of a thick layer of mud left behind by receding water.
There's a lot of cleanup to do. This is pretty bad, really is. But yeah, I was sad that our fence came down because we rebuilt this fence after the last flood.
And this is the biggest flood that we've seen since we've been here, and certainly on the lower end of the neighborhood, so we're on the high end. It's crazy to see the flood line, overhead. Yeah, I hope people were ready for it. I don't know if they were.
Further north in the city of Los Gatos in Silicon Valley, workers were busy tending to washed out roads. They're laying down tarps and sandbags to prevent further deterioration.
As accidents pile up day after day, authorities are warning drivers to stay off the road as much as possible. But if you do have to drive, they say to never try across a flooded road like this one. As one local official put it, it's always deeper than you think and moving faster than expected. The weather forecast is for more heavy rain and winds for at least another week. Mark New, CGTN, Palo Alto, California.
Let's stay in the States because with inflation 3 times higher than the Federal Reserve's target rate, recession fears and a central bank bent on cooling a hot labor market, 2023 is poised to deliver a rather bumpy ride for people with credit card debt. Our correspondent Karina Mitchell reports.
The festive season may be over, but in its place is a holiday hangover. Many Americans may have reached for their credit card one too many times to buy gifts for family, friends, and maybe even themselves.
It's very easy to get into credit card debt and hard to get out of it, especially now.
U.S. credit card delinquencies are on the rise. According to a report from LendingTree, 35% of Americans went into debt over the holidays. While that dipped a percentage point from the previous year, the average amount of debt climbed to more than $1,500, a 24% jump.
And it's not just the holidays that are rattling consumers' finances. Many are racking up high-interest credit card debt due to inflation and a cost of living crisis that's driving up the prices of everything, from food to footwear.
The interests are going higher, and then with this inflation rate, it's very, very high.
Making matters worse for those in debt, the Federal Reserve keeps hiking interest rates to try and stamp out high inflation. According to credit bureau TransUnion, bank card balances hit a record $866 billion in the third quarter of 2022.
We've been measuring credit card rates since 1985 at Bankrate, and the current average of 19.6% is the highest we've ever seen.
But financial expert Ted Rossman says there is a way to immediately help erase high-interest credit card payments.
Get a 0% balance transfer card. So you're going to move your high-cost debt from one or more cards over to this new card with a 0% promotional rate that lasts as long as 21 months.
If that's not an option, using retirement savings may be. Benefits of tapping into a 401k account for a loan include not requiring a credit check and not hurting your credit report. But you may have to pay a 10% penalty if you don't pay it back on time and you're under 59 and a half years old.
It's risky. You're missing out on market gains, too. You know, in effect, you're kind of gambling that the market is going to stay down or stay sideways.
Importantly, once you do get a handle on debt, Rossman says it is important not to allow it to accrue again.
Once you're debt-free, use credit like debit. Pay in full, avoid interest, and get the other benefits.
Karina Mitchell, CGTN, New York.
The headlines again. The inquiry begins. Just how did a systems failure ground flights out of the United States for hours?
Our other headlines: don't call us. That's the message from UK emergency ambulance workers on strike in a dispute over pay.
And Russia's Wagner Group claims victory in the eastern town of Soledar, but Ukraine says its troops are hanging on.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.